Welcome to Roblox Snippets. Normally I do an introduction to show you what I'm doing, but save and load is pretty straightforward, and I've got a bit to cover in this video. So to begin with, we're going to create a save and load module within this project, and then I'm going to transfer that into my main game, Obby. So you can take this and put it into your own project with a couple of conditions that I'll talk about while I'm working through this. But for us to save and load data, we need to have some data. So in our workspace, if you come up to Home and create a part, we'll just call this our test part. And down the bottom, you can just change it to whatever color you like. It doesn't really matter. I'll make mine just a pavement. And we'll scroll down through the properties, and we'll change the size of it to be, say, 5 by 0.5 by 5. Just to make a tile for us to run on, and it's just going to trigger to increase a value for us that we can save and use to check that everything is working okay. So once you have this part in here, make sure you come down, however, and turn on anchored, because when you use a touched event within this in the script, if it's not anchored, it can throw up some weird errors. Right, so we've got this part in our workspace. Now come down to the server script service and click on the plus, and we're going to add a script. And we'll rename this one our main script. And create a couple of variables in here for us to use. And we'll show it on the leaderboard as well. So we'll add in players. Game.players, can't type today, players dot player added, and we'll connect a function to this and pass in the player that is joining the game. Right now we're not going to do anything with characters, however we'll create a local function up here. So local function character added, and we'll pass in the character. And then we'll add a line in here that will be player dot character appearance loaded, and then a colon and connect, and we will connect this function up above to it. So it should look like that. All right. Now the reason I do this is because normally you would say player dot character added and then run your code. Except if you do it this way, it more or less ensures that the character has completely loaded in, so its appearance is in there before it runs this, and you don't get any errors. Okay, so I've discovered this is a very good way to handle characters. But we're not going to really focus on that. So beneath this, we'll create a leader stats board where we can display the value that we're going to save. So local leader stats will equal instance.new, and we're going to create a folder. And we will parent it, so this is a special way of parenting, just a comma, to the player. Right, we'll run this and you can have a look to see how this works if you've never done it before. We need to name our leader stats folder, so name equals leader stats. Okay, so this part here is very important. If it has to be all lowercase leader stats in here or it won't work. You can call this anything you like player stats over here, but this has to be just as you see it. So now we have that folder, we'll add a value to it. So local player, and we'll use level because that's what I'm using in our main game, Obby. And it will be instance.new. I'll just scroll up a little bit. And this one will be a number value. And this time we'll parent this to the leader stats folder. We'll give it a name. So level, name, and we'll simply call it level. And the player level, to start with, its value will equal 0. Okay, so that's all we need in here for us to have a look at it. So I'll just run this in case you've never seen it before. Right, so when I'm loaded into the game, you'll see the leaderboard pops up here with my character name, the level up here, and 0. So where it appears, if you come over to players while the game is running and expand to find your character, and then you'll see the leader stats folder gets created underneath your player, and inside that folder is this value level. All right, so that's its name, and then down here is the value. All right, so you can see how that's set up. So I'll stop that there, and now we'll come over to our test part and add a script to it, and we'll call this our test script. And we'll set it up so we can change that value. So create a variable for the part itself, all right, which will equal script.parent. And just below this, we'll create a variable called db, which is short for debounce, and this helps control our script. So then part.touched. So touched is an event, something that's happening. So when something touches the part, which it will be a player, hopefully, we'll add a colon and connect a function to this, and we'll pass in a parameter of hit, and that represents which part of the character might be hitting this part, like its foot or leg. Using that, we can determine if it's a player. So we can say local player equals game.players, and then a colon, and get player from character, and we'll pass in hit.parent. So this hit up here, character foot, all right, its parent will be the character. So that's what this does here. And then it takes the character and looks in the players and says, yes, that is a player, and puts the player here. So that's how that works. So we've got enough information to make a conditional statement now. So we can say, if we do have a player and db is true, then we can run the code inside. And the first thing we want to do is set db to false. And towards the end of the script, we'll add a task.wait of, say, 1 second, and set db back to true. So effectively, this lets us run our code every second that the player runs back and forth on this part. So now we know we've got the player, we want to get access to their leader stats folder that we created here. And it's inside the player, remember? So we say local, and I'll call it p-stats, short for player stats, equals player, and then wait for child, leader stats. So whenever you use a folder, you should use wait for child, because in the folder it could have hundreds of values and it might not have loaded, and wait for child makes sure or cuts down on the chance that we will have an error that it's completely loaded. So that's why we use wait for child. And then we'll get the player level, which will equal pstats.level. So this must be exactly the same as what you wrote in your main script here. So make sure the spelling is exactly correct, capital L, etc., even if you need to copy and paste to put it here. And then all we need to do then is increase that level. So p-level.value, and we'll say plus equals 1. Right, and that's all we need to give this a test. So come up to View and Output window if you don't have it open. We'll give it a save, and let's play. All right, I'm all loaded in, and you can see my leader stats is up here ready to go. And if I run onto this part, you should see that your level increases each time that you run onto this part. So level 6, level 7, etc. Okay, so that's all we need to get us some data for us to work with. So after this, I'll stop the game and we will get on with creating the module that we're going to use to save and load player data for your players. Now we have a way to create some data for us to save and load. We'll come over to our server script service and click on the plus, and we're going to add a module script. So if you don't see it come up here, just start typing module into the search box and it should come up near the top. Left click on it and we'll add it in. We're going to change the name of this module script to be data mod script. All right, now you'll see if you've never used module scripts before, don't get too worried about it. Once you discover how to use them, which it's very easy, you will wonder how you did without it because they are very powerful and very good to use. You'll notice they start off with these lines of code added into them, and unlike the hello world that you see, we don't want to get rid of these. So, but we do want to change the name module here. So highlight the name module after the local and rename it to be data mod. And then we want to do the same thing just down below, data mod. All right, now, unique thing about module scripts are that they don't run by themselves. They need to be required or added into another script. And we're going to do that from our main script over here. So click on or open your main script if it's not open. And then come right up the top above the character added function we created earlier. And we'll create a variable called data mod. And it will be equal to, and a special word, require. Okay. So add require, and you'll get a set of parentheses, and then we put in the file path. So game.server-script-service.data-mod-script. And that is all we need to do to get it to run. So down, we'll come back to our mod script to get something, because you won't see anything if we run it just at the moment. But if we think about it logically, about when we save and load data, we have a player that enters the game up here. So they join the game, and then their leader stats folder gets created, values get created, and then down the bottom here, we're going to create in our main script here, and you can put this in here now if you like, just add a couple of minus signs for a comment and type data stores section, and then a few more dashes, and drop down a few lines and run some more minus signs right across. So this will just let us know that this is where we're going to do any work with data stores, and you do this at the end of all of these variables. So you might have 50 or 100 in here, but you'll do this down the bottom. All right. Coming back to our data mod now. So the first thing we're going to do is create a function that will handle when players join the game. So inside of our module, we create our functions in a slightly different way in a module. We start off by typing the word function, and then the name of the module that you're in, so data mod, followed by a dot, and then you give it a name. So in this case, we'll call this one player joining, with a set of brackets, and we're going to pass in each player and hit enter. Okay, so this is our player that is joining the game. Now, when they join the game, we're going to check whether they have data, so they're a returning player. And if that's the case, we want to load the data in for the player. However, if they're a new player, then we want to set up a data store for that player and save their data so that we can keep track of what they're doing in the game. Now, one thing that we'll use to identify the player rather than their name is a thing called the player user ID. So we'll create a variable here, player ID, and that will be equal to the player dot user ID. So it must be typed exactly like this. So capital U and a capital I to get a hold of the player ID. Once we do that, we want to get a hold of the player's leader stats. So all of the values inside of that, ready to either load data into it or save that blank data to a data store for the player. So we'll say local p stats will equal player, and we'll say wait for child, leader stats, and then at the very end of this, add a colon and put get children. And I'll get rid of this over here. So this will get the folder, but then it will get all the values inside of it. So this becomes a table that we can work with to save or load data with. So the next thing that we want to do is get ready to use the data store. Now, to use the data store, we'll come up to the top, very top, and make sure it's outside of our data mod here. So drop down a couple of lines. We're going to get the data store service. So local DSS, short for data store service, equals game, and then get service data store service. Below this, we'll create a another variable called all player data, and that will be equal to DSS colon get data store. Okay, now there's a few options. Make sure it's get data store, and inside of here you need to come up with a unique name for your data store. So I'm going to call this Obby testing data, and you could call it banana or cheese or whatever you like, but it needs to be unique so that we're always accessing the same thing. And I like to add a version. So if you put an underscore and then 0.0.1, this lets you reset your data store by just adding a number onto the end. Now, excuse me, the way that this works, and it's a bit unique, is it will attempt to get this data store, all right? So, and if it looks for this and doesn't find it, then it will create one for us and put it back over here. Now, all player data, that means that all of the player data for your game, so 50, 100 players, whatever it is, will get saved into here. Okay, so that's the important thing. This is all player data that we're dealing with here. So now that we have this container up here for us to save into, we'll come back down to our player joining, and we're going to check and see if the player has any data. So we'll say local and data equals all player data. So we're going to look in this, and we use a special method called get async, and it requires a couple of things in here. Only one really. We want to look up the player using the player ID. So we simply put in here player ID. Now, if it looks in this data store and doesn't find any player data, this will be nil. All right. And if it finds something, then data will be data, of course. So we'll use that to create a conditional statement down below. So if data is not equal to, now that little squiggly line, if you hold down your shift key and you'll find it up next to the 1 on your keyboard to the left, that stands for not equal to. All right, so not equal to nil. Then, and we'll put a comment in here for now, player has data. All right, so if it's not equal to nil, then we're going to write something here to load the data in for the player. Now, after that, we'll add an else, and we can put a comment here. Player is a new player. All right, so that's how we divide this up. Now we'll put in a test or a print in each of these. So print up where it has data, player has data, and then in our else statement we'll add in print new player. All right, so at this stage we're just checking to see if the player has any data or not. Now before we do any checks at all, in order to make use of the data store service, we need to publish our game. So firstly, come up and click on File and then Save, and then click on File and then come down to Publish to Roblox. And when you do that, you'll have a window come up like this. So name your game up the top. So I'm going to call this Video Test Obby Data Save, just to be overly complicated. Call yours whatever you like, and a description. I'm going to turn off Team Create down the bottom because I'm just doing it by myself. And we're going to click on Create. Give it a second or two, and when it's finished, you should get this Publish Game Success window, and you can go ahead and close this. Now that we've published it, we want to turn on a setting. So come up to Home at the top, and you should find over on the right, Game Settings. Now sometimes if your window is squashed over, you won't see it, so just stretch the studio out until this appears, then left click on it, and you'll have all of this information come up, which you can click through and have a look at if you've never done it. The one that we are interested in, however, is security over on the left, and we want to come down and find Enable Studio Access to API Services, and you'll see the text underneath gives access to data stores. So you want to click on this switch till it goes green and then click on Save. Once you've done that, it's always good to give it another quick save and another publish before we try to test anything. Now now that we have this function here, at the moment it's not running, but we're going to run it by coming up here and take a copy. So highlight the name of the function and hit Command or Control C, and then come into your main script in our data stores section and Command or Control V to paste it in. Alright, now you can just type it in here too, and if you start typing data mod and then dot, you'll see that we have our function pop up here in the helper text, and you can type in player in there yourself. Right, so this is going to run each time a player joins the game. So let's come up and click on play. And if all is working correctly, you should see down the bottom in your output window, new player. All right, and that is what we're looking for. So it is working correctly just at the moment. And now, even if I stop this and play again, it's still going to continue to call me new player because we haven't made any method yet to save data, which we're going to do next. So stop the game there, and we will move on to how to save data to our data store. So our next step is to create a new function, and we'll do that just up above where we did our player joining. So up there, just make a bit of space, and we'll create the new function. So function data mod, and this one will be .save player data. And we once again will pass in the player. So this is going to serve two functions really. When we have the new player, it's going to set it up as a new player and save their data, or when the player leaves the game, it's going to save the data when they leave the game. So that's how we will save. And before we even type anything, let's set that up. So take a copy of the function name and Command or Control C, and scroll down into our player joining to where we have new player, just underneath where we have our print statement, and Command or Control V to paste it in, and that way this will run once we play the game and test it very shortly. Right, so coming back up here, we're going to do some steps are pretty much the same. So if you wanted to, out of your player joining, come down and grab the player ID and the stats. All right, so we want to get both of those. You can highlight those and then Command or Control C, copy, and Command or Control V to paste them into our saved data. Now right below this, we'll create a data table that is empty. All right, so we're going to populate this with the data that we're going to get from the players' player stats. So this will work for new players or returning players because we'll load in another function, but this will always save whatever is in the player stats. All right. So right below this, the way we're going to populate it is to use a for loop and add it into the data table. So follow along. We'll say for I, comma each stat in pairs, and we're going to look through the p stats table. And then just outside do. Now, we're actually, while we say we're creating a table, it is actually a dictionary. Now, a dictionary is made up, in a table, it has an index number, say 1, and then we'll store the value next to it, all right? So it's based on numbers. Dictionaries use words, which is called a key, to take place, the place of the I, and then that word is equal to the value that you want to store. All right. Now, we'll create two variables to make it clear to you in case this is new. The first one will be local key, and it will be equal to each stat dot name, and below this local value will be equal to each stat dot value. All right. So if I was to print this out, which we can, so key, and then a comma and then value, you should see that it prints out down the bottom here, level. Okay, so level is like the index part or the key, and 0 is the value over here. Okay, just to make that clear. So now that we have these two values here, we're going to put them into this data table up here, or create a data dictionary. And we say data, and then a set of square brackets, key, equals value. And that's all we need to do to populate our data table with however many stats there are inside of this leader stats folder. So we've got a table now. Now what we want to do is we want to save it to our data store. So right below our for loop, just drop down a line, and we're going to create two variables, success, and then a comma, error, equals, and we're using a special function call called a pcall. Now, pcall functions, if you look at the helper text, runs the provided function and catches any error it throws, returning the function's success and its results. So what that basically means is success over here will be true or false. So if it's successful, then it will return true, and if not, it will return false, and it will also return the error to us. And it stops the script from breaking if there are errors. All right. And we can use this because the reason we're using this is because when you access data stores, because it's a network call over the internet, sometimes it will fail, and we want to catch that error. All right. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Inside of the pcall, we add a function, and then outside the first bracket, hit enter. So it looks like this. Now, inside of this, we're going to access our data store by saying all player data, and then instead of get async, we're going to set async. And this requires two bits of information. The first one is our player ID. And what do we want to save? We want to save the data table that we just created up here and populated. All right. So it'll run this on the internet, and then we need to do a couple of checks below to make sure, just to ensure that we know that it's been saved. So we write if success, then, so if this is true, let's scroll up here a bit, we can simply print a message down here. So we can say print player data saved. Right, so if it was successful and it's saved, it'll come up with this. We can also put down here an else statement, and we'll use a special kind of print called warn, which will come up in orange, and add in a message, save player data failed, with a little exclamation mark, and a comma and the error. So it will let us know what the problem was when it failed, all right? So hopefully that won't happen to you, but that is enough now to get this to run when the player joins the game. So come up to View and the output window to make sure, see if we get any errors. Then we want to click on File and Save, and then File and Publish to Roblox before we test. Once you've done that, come up and let's give it a play. All right, if it all went well, you should see the first message, new player, and then player data saved. Okay. Now, stop the game then if you have that message. And this time, when we click on play, we should get player has data. All right. So if that's what happened when you play the second time, you've got player has data, then everything is working correctly, and we're ready to move on to loading the data back in when the player rejoins our game. So stop the game and we'll move on to that now. All right, just before we set up our load player data, you may have noticed that we've only ever saved the data down here in player joining when the new player joins. So at the moment, if our player is running around in our game, we've got no way to save the data to the data store when they leave the game. So to do that, what we'll do is come up to our main script. So if you don't have that open, open it up. And we're going to add in a bit of code down the bottom here straight after our player joining. So to do that, it's a special kind of function that we're going to add in here. And we type game and then a colon, all right, bind to close. So when you start typing it, if you read it, it says binds a function to be called upon the, before the game shuts down. All right, so enter that in, and then we just simply want to add in a function and hit enter. We're going to add in here then our data mod dot save player data and pass our player in. So what this effectively does is our main script that we're in here, it runs once at the beginning when the player joins the game. And it takes this function and it effectively pins it to each player and says, okay, I'm just going to sit here and wait until they close the game, and it's the last thing that gets done, and it saves the player data. All right. So if we come back into our data mod now and have a look, it's going to run this function up here, the last thing. So any progress the player has made up here will be collected, saved, and we should get a message down the bottom here. Okay. Now we'll come up to above our save player data, and now we're going to load any data back in for the player when they rejoin the game. So make yourself a little bit of space here, and we will add in our new function to load the data. So function data mod dot load player data, and in this case we're going to pass in two items. We're going to pass in the player and data, and then hit enter. Now the place that this is going to happen, if you take a copy of this function call, so highlight it and then Command or Control C to copy it, come down to our player joining, and you'll remember down here when they join the game, if they have data, we're going to run this here. So just below this print statement, paste it in, and it's simply going to grab the data that it's already got and load it in for the player. So while this only runs once when a player joins, it will either load data if they have it, or it'll set the player up with new data and then they can go on playing, etc., until it saves when they leave. So hopefully that all makes sense to you. So let's come back up to our load player data and we'll add the code in here. The first thing we're going to do is get a hold of the player's stats. So you can copy this from our save player data down below. So just highlight it and copy it and then paste it in. And then we're going to scroll through each of their stats, and from the data we're going to take that data and add it into each stat using a for loop. Alright, so just follow along here. So for I, each stat in pairs and p stats do. Alright, now because we have the player, we can access their leader stats directly by typing player, alright, dot leader stats, and then a square bracket. Now we're going to, remember we said we had a dictionary, so inside of the folder that we're currently up to, we firstly want to get the name of the stat. So we want to say each stat dot name, which will be level, and then we want to change its value. So we add at the end here dot value. Alright, so that's what this does. It's getting the level name and then the value over here. And then we want to make it equal to, and we want to look now in the data table up here, and this helper text has come up to do exactly what I want it to do. Data, a set of square brackets, each stat dot name. Now, we only put the name here, not value, because when you look in a table, this is like the index number of a table, so only it's a name, and it will actually return to us then the value. So this leader stats value becomes equal to the data value over here. All right. Hopefully that makes sense, and we can put down underneath here print player data loaded. And that's all we need to do. So to give this a test, we firstly want to make sure your output window is open down here so we can see if we have any errors. Come up to File and Save, and then File and Publish to Roblox. And then let's play the game. Alright, so as we've already run it, it says player has data, player data loaded, but because there was nothing there, it's just come up with 0. But now, let's run over and actually create some data by running over our part. So, I don't know, a few times. So, I've got 5, level 5, come up to stop. So, player data has saved, and then click on play again. And you should find that we have player has data, player data loaded, and up in the leader stats, it has come up with level 5, and that's what I left at. Okay, so, and you can continue to test that. So we might get him up to, say, level 10. Sorry, my internet has decided to slow down there for a moment. All right, so we're up to level 14, and if I stop, right, player data saved, and let's play one more time, and we're up to 14. Alright, so everything is working just as we would expect. So go ahead and just stop there. Now, if you want to try and save this module and add it into your own project, then there are a couple of things that you should be aware of. Firstly, it's only saving whatever is inside of the leader stats. Now, you can't save everything, like it won't save Boolean values, for example, that sort of thing. So you need to be mindful that that is the case. Now, you may also have values in here that you don't want to save, and I'm going to cover that when I add this into the main script, into the main game Obby very shortly. I'll show you how to transfer this entire module into the main game Obby, and then be selective about what you do save and what you don't save. So if you'd like to, or if you've been developing your Obby along with me, stick around and I'll show you how to add it in, or you may just want to watch just to see how it's done. Okay, if you've stuck around, we're going to transfer our data mod script over here into the main game Obby project or your own project. So to do that, come over to the data mod and right click on it, and then come down to save to file. Now, when you do that, it'll bring up a window that you're going to save it to somewhere on your computer, so pick somewhere you can find it. However, with this file, you'll notice down the bottom that it says Lua scripts. You need to change this with the drop down so that it's an RBXM file, okay? Because if you try to import Lua into Studio, you'll probably find that it won't work properly. So make sure that you change this and then click on Save. So I'll just click on the one I've already got here and then Save and replace the one I'd already done. And we don't need to worry about this test part or the script inside of it because we're making use of the project. So when you've done that and you've saved it, you can close this file and open up your main game Obby to add it in. Or if you just want to watch, then I'll talk you through how I go about adding it in and making it all work with the existing project. Alright, so I've got my main game Obby open and we have lots of obstacles right up to our spinning platforms that we added in the last video. So to add this module into this project, we are going to come over to the server script service, right click on it and click on Insert from File, locate your data mod script, left click on it and click on Open, and it will add it in here. So you can go ahead and open it up. We won't need to do anything too radical to change things, but what we might do though is where it says Obby testing data up the top here, change this to a different name to begin with. So perhaps Obby main game data, etc. I'm just going to change mine to 2 because I've already got one, and then I'll fix it up later. And you could probably change the version if you like at the end if you want to use the same one over here as well when we start to use it. Now, we do need to make a couple of adjustments to our code to get this to work. Now, because I've written this in conjunction, everything should work just nicely. But if you're using it in your own project, then of course you're going to need to make sure you have a leader stats folder. So open up your main script, and you'll see in here that in my main script I've got a leader stats folder, and I have more than one value in here. So I've got checkpoint, level, and boxes. Now, for saving and loading, I'm only going to save the level data, and I'll explain why shortly. But let's set up our main script so that we can use our data mod. So I'll just make this a bit bigger so you can see. At the very top, we want to create the variable data mod, and that will be equal to require, okay? And then the file path, so we can put game.server-script-service.datamod. And that's all we need to put in there. Then down the bottom, after our last value, we're going to put in a data store section. All right, so it's very clear where we're working with our data stores. And we need to add the 2 lines of code that we had in before. So the first one was to add datamod.playerJoining and pass the player in, and that will do the checks for us. And then right below that, let's move up a little bit, we add game and then a colon, bind to close with a function inside of it. Move out 1 and hit enter, and then add datamod.save player data and pass the player through. Okay, so those are the lines that we need to add in here to make everything work together. Now the next thing that needs to happen is that we need to come up to File and Save, and then File and Publish to Roblox. Now you can create a new data store if you like, but I'm going to update an existing game down in the bottom left corner here. And when I do that, it'll come up with all the things that I have, and I'm just going to use the video test Obby data here. To select that, and I'll override it. Get my confirmation window and click close. Then we need to come up to Home and over to Game Settings. And if you remember, come down to Security. And because I've overwritten this one, it's already turned on. But if this one is grey, you'll need to change Enable Studio Access to API Services to green, and then click on Save down the bottom here. But I don't need to do that, so I can just close it. All right, so once again, save, and we can publish. Now, the thing that I wanted to point out here was you don't necessarily want to save all of your values. And the reason is, if I come back in here and we look at the Obby, all right, so we start over here on this blue square, and I jump across, and I get to this checkpoint, say. All right, so I've got checkpoint 2, and then I pick up a box and a box. And I might get up to this checkpoint. Now at this stage, I will have 2 boxes and I'll be on checkpoint 4. Now if I save that and the player comes back, in my level, let's say I only wanted them to collect a certain number of boxes, they have the ability to run back through the level and get more boxes than I intended them to get. So if I was to save and get out of the game here, I could keep jumping over here and getting boxes, and that is not really what I want. So what I do want to happen is when the player leaves the game, that they are saved on the level they're on. So if this is level 2, they will always return here, and the whole level is set up correctly, and they must get through and get to level 3 in order to save. Otherwise, they always come back and start at level 2. So I assume that will make sense to everybody. Now, to get around that, we can come in to our data mod, and let's come down into where we are saving our player data, and in here you'll see that we've got for I, each stat in pairs, etc, etc. Do this. All right, now we're going to put a conditional statement in here to say we only want to do this if it is equal to level. Okay, so in my case I only want to save this one here. Okay, now if you wanted to save everything and not just one particular item, then you could say if not boxes, for example, then save the rest of them. Okay, so there's ways to get around that, and there are other ways. This is a simple save and load method. So we'll come back to our mod here, and we'll put in here if each stat dot name equals level, okay, then, and if I hit enter, now we want to take whatever's left here and put it inside of here. And that's all we need to do, and now it will only save that one value, even though I have multiple values inside of here, and it will be good to go. Now, it is probably a good idea to change your version and start with a fresh data store if you haven't done that, so just increase the number. And then you can come over and click on File and Save and Publish. Alright, from previous testing, before I go into this test, I had set my checkpoint to be 4 so I could jump through the level, but I'll set it back to 1 and my level back to 1 in boxes. Now, it's a good idea if you are playing with these values that you put in whatever the default is. So default, alright, equals 1 as a, in case you play around with it and you can't remember what it should have been at. And I might do the same thing here. So default equals 1, and boxes, well, it'll be the same. So default equals 0. Right, so we'll click on File and Save and Publish to Roblox, and let's play the game. Alright, so I have loaded in. Now it's come up and said player data loaded. Alright, it probably should have said new player for me, but let's jump over to and try to accomplish something in the game. Alright, so I'm jumping over. I've got 1 box, checkpoint 2. Whoops, see, now I hit the base plate and it's taken me straight back to checkpoint 3, which I'd got up to because I clipped, which was lucky. Alright, and then come over to here. Well, not very not very good at this. Alright, so let's come over to here and we'll get up to checkpoint 4 now. So now I need to get over to the goal. So if I get into the middle of my spinning platforms here, and I'll just wait, and then I should be able to run over here, and there we go. I have changed to level 2. So now let's click on stop. And it says down the bottom, player data saved. And if I click on play again now, you should see that it comes up as player level 2. My checkpoint's gone back to 1 and my boxes are at 0. So everything is working correctly. Alright, and the obby is starting to take shape. So I hope you enjoyed that video and you can get some use out of it. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video where we'll create a new obstacle and make this much bigger. If you found this video useful, subscribe now. For more information about my online courses, go to mrbrendanross.com.